Hi, welcome to the IHC Craft Room. I'm Mary. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I dot painted this evil eye themed heart. I'll show you all the steps and materials. So what is the evil eye symbol? It's a symbol that you can find across a number of cultures and religions, probably over centuries. It shows up in different ways in each of those different places, but generally speaking, the concept is the same. It's to block negativity, block negative intentions, block anything negative that people are trying to put into your orbit. Get it out of here. We don't want it. I'll show you exactly how I made this step by step. So grab all your stuff and let's get crafty. This is Mary. Welcome to the IHC Craft Room. For materials, we'll begin with a 9.5-inch wooden heart shape, acrylic paint in peacock blue, tropical blue, white, and black, chalk paint in black, actually. I'm showing white here, but I switched it out to black when I realized my mistake. Matte varnish, and teardrop sticker jewels. For tools, we'll begin with my dotting tools, of course, my pretty pink ruler, a paint palette, a cup of water, a wet rag, a paintbrush, Gorilla super glue, some Q-tips, some toothpicks, and a pair of tweezers. Let's start with a couple of thin coats of black base paint. Since this is chalk paint, one coat would do, but no self-respecting extra lady would just do one measly coat, okay? So I did two, followed by 2 thin coats of varnish to protect my base coat because I will definitely make some mistakes. For this design, we're going to start by finding the spot where we want the center dot, or in this case, the eyeball's pupil to be. I looked for a large black rhinestone in all my usual places, but I wasn't successful, so I'm going to use a cabochon and make it glittery myself, but we'll get to that a little bit later. For now, I want to make sure I leave enough room for it in the center, because I'll be pissed if the cabochon covers my first row of dots, okay? We're going to be drawing some inspiration from the evil eye symbol, so I'm going to keep an example of that close by so that I keep my colors in order. All right, let's get this party started with some tropical blue paint and my 2mm pink stylus. I'm going to lay some dots all around using a cross formation because I find that to be the easiest way to make sure I leave enough room for the last dot of the row. Let's do that again for row number 2, but this time I'm not going to use the cross formation. So to make sure I don't run my dots together at the end of the row, I'm going to leave that last dot out until the row has dried completely. And then I'll come back and pop that last dot in when there's no fear of being, blobby. More on that in a minute. For row 3, we're going to size up our dotting tool to the 3mm green stylus and we'll switch to white paint. As I near the end of this row, it becomes pretty apparent that I've let my dot size get away from me a bit, so I've badly spaced the last couple of dots. Thank God for Q-tips and that layer of varnish we laid down to protect the base coat. Opa, we needed it. The key to correcting mistakes like this is to have a pointed Q-tip if possible. They are game changers, no doubt about it. But you must be patient and take your time, or else you'll start accidentally swiping away at dots you didn't want to remove, and you'll have to do a lot of repair work. First, I'll go back and drop in that last light blue dot into row 2, now that it's nice and dry. And then I'll try to add 3 well-sized dots in to complete row 3. Sweet. Now let's do that again in row 4, but preferably without the mistake this time, thanks. Row 5 brings a color switch to that bright peacock blue, but I'm going to stick with my green 3mm stylus for this row and the next one too. Okay, while we get these 2 rows done, let's talk a bit about spacing. I'm leaving a noticeable gap between all of my dots. Experienced dot painters don't do that. They can butt their dots up against each other like besties, and they probably fart rainbows too, but whatever, not all of us like to roll that way, But don't worry about the little gaps between the dots. We'll fill those in later, and it'll look fab. Just wait. Row 7 is where this pattern gets a bit icy because this is the row we'll be adding those beautiful teardrop jewels to later. Using the number 10 white rod and white paint, I'm going to place a large white dot close to the blue dots of row 6. Then I'm going to use my smallest stylus, the 0.8mm yellow one, to draw that dot down to a point. I like to call this type of voluptuous swipe an ice cream cone swipe because, hello guys, yum! Tell me you don't see it. Come on, that's an ice cream cone. Is it just me? I don't think it's just me. It might be just me. Anywho, I'm gonna slow this down to real time so you can see how long it takes to make one of these ice cream cone swipes. The key is to have some paint on the dotting tool, but not a lot, or else you'll end up with a fat-bottomed ice cream cone, which is totally genius when it comes to real ice cream cones, but not so much for this design. Okay, you get the point. It takes some time. Let's speed things up and move things along, shall we? I'm gonna add some of these teardrop dots in between to get a total of 8 spread out somewhat evenly around the large center eyeball we just finished dotting from rows 1 to 6. You probably noticed by now that with the exception of the cabochon's location, I haven't put in any guidelines at all. If I had, this design would end up being a lot more symmetrical and balanced, but I didn't do that. I decided to eyeball it. Get it? I'm gonna eyeball my evil eye design. Hey-oh, that's a spicy meatball. For the next part of our pattern, we'll be using the walk the dots technique to create the oversized petals that'll surround our white teardrop jewels. Let's start with some white paint and the pink 2mm stylus. The walk the dots technique is a favorite of mine, and once you get the hang of it, you'll see it makes a lovely pattern and is quite simple to do. So let's do another row of it using the same dotting tool and white paint while I explain. The key to walking the dots is to avoid adding more paint to your stylus after the first dip. Let's slow it down so you can see what I mean. I load my stylus with paint and then dot, dot, dot without reloading until the paint runs out. Each dot naturally gets smaller as the paint diminishes. This creates a smooth, gradual transition from larger to smaller dots, and that's the magic of walking the dots. For the next row of our petals, we'll size up the dotting tool to the 3mm green stylus and switch back to that bright peacock blue. And I'm going to continue using the walk the dots technique to complete not 1, but 2 more rows of our petal with this vibrant blue. But for the second of these bright blue rows, we'll size up the dotting tool to the 3.5mm white rod for the peak of the petal. And then we'll switch back to the 3mm green stylus to walk the dots from the peak all the way down and around each petal. For the next 2 rows of our petal, we'll switch to the light blue paint, but we're going to use the same tools that we did for the previous 2 rows. We'll use the 3.5mm white rod to drop a dot at the peak of the petal, and then the 3mm green stylus to walk the dots around that petal. But this row is a bit different because as the petals get larger, filling my stylus with paint one time and then walking the dots just won't cut it. I won't get dots all the way around the petal because my paint will run out too soon. To avoid this, before walking the dots, I'll lay down 3 full-size dots, adding paint to my stylus between each one. And once I lay down dot number 4, I'll begin walking the dots. That way, I can get all the way to the base of the petal. You'll also notice as I get closer to the base and my dots are getting smaller, I flip my green stylus over to the smaller 1.25mm side to complete walking the teeny tiny dots at the base of the petal. Beauty. We've got one last row before the base of our design is complete. For this final row, we'll switch to white paint and use the same 3.5mm white rod for the peak of the petal, and then the 3mm green stylus for the rest. With that done, let's move on to some accent eyeballs in between each petal. Using the 10.0 white rod and peacock blue paint, we'll pop a dot in between each petal. But for this small spot, I'll size down to the 8.0 white rod. No big deal. Once those bright blue dots have dried, we'll switch to white paint and the 7.0 white rod to add a center top dot to each of the blue dots. And then once the white dots are dry, we'll switch to the light blue paint and the 3.5 white rod to add another center top dot. And once that's dry, the last step will be adding a little black pupil on each eye using the 2mm pink stylus and some black paint. That looks so cool. Now let's erase that chalk line we made earlier and then move on to micro dots. We're going to be using micro dots to fill in those little spaces we left between each dot. Using the 0.8mm yellow stylus, we'll start with the light blue paint and drop 2 super small dots in between each dot on that row. The key to keeping your dots small is to make sure you don't let paint pile up on your dotting tool. So keep wiping it clean every few dots or so. I'm making sure that my micro dots are the same color as the original dots on whichever row I'm dotting to keep the colors uniform. I'm going to continue this pattern across this entire design, including every row of the petals. Doesn't that look great? Love it. Okay, we have a few more steps left. First, let's use a 3mm green stylus and some light blue paint to add a top dot to the large white dot at the tip of each petal. Excellent. Now let's pause here to work on the Cabochon pupil so that it's ready for when we need it. We're going to need a few things for that, so let's start with a piece of paper towel, General's kneadable eraser, black glitter, some rubbing alcohol, clear nail polish or top coat or something, a plastic bottle cap, and a 1-inch cabochon. First of all, what is a cabochon? It's a smooth domed piece of glass with a flat back. Unlike faceted gemstones, cabochons don't have cuts or angles. They have a rounded, polished surface that magnifies whatever is underneath it. They're used in a ton of different ways. I personally use them for jewelry making, magnets, keychains, you name it. You can find them in clear, colored, or patterned designs, making them super versatile for all kinds of creative projects. All right, let's move along. First, let's take a chunk of that kneadable eraser and roll it into a nice little ball. You can probably use that sticky tack stuff, but this is what I use with no issues, and I got mine at Michael's, FYI. Then we'll attach the cabochon with the curved side down so that the curved side is stuck to the kneadable eraser or tacky stuff. Because we want the flat side up for this, and then we'll pop that onto the back of the plastic bottle cap so that we are ready to go. Next, let's clean off all my finger oils from the glass cabochon using some rubbing alcohol. This will make sure that the glitter adheres to it a lot better. Now we're going to give this a nice thick coat of clear nail polish, and then let's dump a ton of black glitter on it. Oppa! Glitter for everyone! Awesome! Now we'll let this set for a bit before we come back and add a layer of clear nail polish over top all of the glitter to keep it in place. Boom! Our glittery pupil is ready. Let's go! I've been looking forward to this since the first ice cream cone. It's time to add in our light blue teardrop jewels. I'm adding a small dot of Gorilla Crazy Glue in the center of each white ice cream cone and scooting that pretty jewel into place. But what are we going to do about the one with the hole through it? Don't worry, we'll get to that later. But first, let's glue down that glittery cabochon with a generous amount of Gorilla Crazy Glue. Sweet, we're almost there. Now let's grab the black paint and the 1.25 millimeter small side of our green stylus and add a tiny black pupil to each of the eyes at the tip of each petal. Ooh, doesn't that look cool? Now let's deal with this whole situation. The solution is a simple one. I'll size down on the jewel size and leave the hole clear for the final piece of this puzzle, the jute cord. Now let's get this beauty up on the wall and enjoy her sparkle. So what do you think? It came out beautiful, right? This is a really simple pattern that you can replicate in a number of different ways. And it'll probably come out a little bit differently every single time. It does for me. And as you can see, I definitely don't worry about guidelines. I don't worry about things being perfectly symmetrical because guess what? Isn't it stunning anyway? Isn't it beautiful? If you look at all of the little things that are wrong about it, doesn't that make it just a little bit more special? Because it does to me. That's what I love about dot painting. It doesn't need to be perfect. I love how this turned out. I think it's really stunning. It's going to look beautiful up on the wall. And I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments below. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about dot painting, check out one of these videos. And don't forget to subscribe so that we can continue to get crafty together. Toodaloo!